The raven's cry had faded, but its echo lived on in the bones of the hill. The mist still clung like mourning cloths to the ramparts of the fort, as if even the land itself refused to forget. Or once the wind danced freely over the heather. In hollows, it now slithered low, cautious, afraid. Something unseen had awoken beyond the forests. In every branch, every brook, every stone knew its name. Rome. Ilara knelt beside the hearth, but there was no warmth in her fire this morning, only smoke, thin, gray, and bitter. It curled like a dying breath around her hands as she turned the spit, the meat turning with a slow groan, its juices spitting into the flames like whispers. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of remembrance. Each dawn now felt like a borrowed hour. She watched the children play near the well, their laughter bright, untouched, not yet sullied by the knowledge carried in the tired eyes of their parents. Little Gwen was dragging a carved oak figure through the grass, its wooden spear broken. He's still fighting, she giggled, raising it toward the rising sun. But even her voice, so pure, sounded faint against the moaning wind. Ilara turned her gaze eastward. The sky no longer brought hope, it brought dread. The clouds gathered, not as weather, but as omen. Her grandmother had once told her, when the sky bleeds iron, bury your songs deep in the soil. Only then will they grow again. And yet, how deep is deep enough? The old druid still stood near the sacred oak. He hadn't moved since the raven's cry, the soto in hand, robes damp with dew, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not blink. He did not speak. The people called him Matic, but no one dared say his true name. He was older than the Roman maps, older, some said, than the stones themselves. And today, even the wind bent its path to avoid him. A few of the elders gathered nearby. They did not speak of Rome, not aloud, but in their glances, in the way their hands gripped their belts or rested near the blades still wrapped in cloth. The name thundered silently between them. A distant sound stirred the morning hush. A horn, not ours, not carved from stag bone, not shaped by village hands. This one was deeper, metallic, deliberate. It rolled over the hills like a wave, low and steady, flattening the birdsong, swallowing even the stream's babble. It was the kind of sound that didn't end. It simply waited. Ilara stood. Her hand still held the river stone. She hadn't meant to. It was simply there, as if it had always been. As if it had chosen to be. So warm now, alive, a whisper of something older than fear. The elders turned as one to Matic. He raised the mistletoe high. And finally, he spoke. The gods no longer sleep. His voice was brittle, like dry reeds, but it carried across the stone paths, into the caves, into the chests of those too young to understand and those too old to forget. Then dropped the mistletoe to the ground. No one moved. Even the children stopped, as if the act itself had broken something. A pact, a silence, protection that had held this place safe for generations. Ilara heard her own heartbeat, loud, ragged, not in her ears, in the earth, beneath her feet, like a drum. They would come. Not today, perhaps, but soon. And they would not come hungry. They would come full of gold, of power, of gods in iron helmets and tongues dipped in law. And yet, the hill fort watched. It had stood for centuries, carved from sweat and mud and faith. Its walls bore the scars of forgotten wars. Its towers still smelled of pitch and blood. And though time gnawed at its edges, the bones of its builders still lay buried beneath guardians in silence. Ilara walked the path toward Matic. She passed the carved stones, each etched with spirals, with suns, with animals that no longer walked the earth. She passed the ash circle where warriors once danced with painted skin and fire-lit eyes, and she passed her father's cairn, a mound of stone, moss-covered now, but still whispering his name with every breeze. Will we fight? Someone asked. A voice cracked, frightened, from behind. Elara did not stop walking. She did not answer. Instead, she reached the sacred oak, placed the stone into the cold, dark soil at its base, and whispered a name only she and the roots would know. A vow, a tether, a resistance. Matic looked at her, then truly looked, and in his gaze was no fear, only the deep ache of knowing, of having seen this before, 100 winters ago. Of remembering, the last time the torches came through the trees, the wind shifted, the air thickened, a soft tremble moved through the land. Not war, not yet, but the silence before it. And in that silence, we promise took root. Not all would survive, but something would. A story, a seed, a name whispered into dirt. The torchbearers would come. They would build roads and temples and graves. They would rename the rivers and silence the gods. They would place their eagles atop our stones and call it conquest. But beneath their sandals, the land would remember, and the stone in the soil would grow warm once more as the mist pulled back, retreating like a tide. The first true light of morning kissed the hill's peak, golden, fragile, defiant. Somewhere far beyond the trees, another horn cried out, this time closer. But the fire was lit now, and the old gods watched. The river no longer sang. It gnashed its way through the valley, swollen by the winter rains, a snarling thing of mud and memory. Foam curled at its edges like the froth of a wounded beast, and its currents clawed at the banks as if trying to pull the land back into itself, as if trying to drown the future before it arrived. Bran stood alone on the bank, the wind carving lines across his face that time hadn't yet finished. His wool cloak, soaked at the hem, slapped against his legs like a dying banner, and, behind him, the land breathed shallowly, wounded, waiting. Smoke curled up from the distant hills, not the thin, familiar tendrils of hearthfire, but a dark, oily plume, heavy, hungry, the scent of burning timber mixed with something older, something sacred. The bones of trees failed not for warmth, but for dominance. Shrines, halls, and memories all turned to ash under the cold logic of Rome. His fingers, thick and scarred from years at the plow and axe, curled into fists. There was no weapon in his hand, only the weight of 1,000 harvests, 1,000 names spoken to the wind, 1,000 oaths whispered to the soil. The Iceni once moved like wind, his father had said, voice low by the peat fire. We ran with the deer, we sang with the birds. The rivers knew our feet, and the stones knew our blood. But the rivers had changed. Now they carried more than fish and twigs and driftwood. Now they bore the iron temps of coins, of rules, of orders barked in a foreign tongue. Bran turned his face to the sky, gray, cold, without promise. Somewhere beyond the trees, the sound of metal rang out, hammers striking stakes, chains clinking. A new road being born, straight and stiff-backed, like the men who made it. A path that split the hills like an axe through bark. His jaw tightened. They did not ask. They came with their gods in golden helmets, and their maps inked in certainty. Paved over stories with stone, dug through burial mounds with laughter. They called it order, but the land called it grief. He looked down. In the wet mud at his feet, a sliver of wood poked through a forgotten toy. A horse, its legs worn to nubs, its painted eyes long since faded. He remembered it, his, from another life. When he had believed, the trees whispered only secrets, not warnings. When Lyra's laughter rang like birdsong through the canopy, and the world seemed impossibly wide, he knelt, scooping it up. The wood was slick with earth, but smooth beneath his touch, like it had been waiting for him to remember. Lyra He saw her face now, as it had been alight with wonder at a nest tucked beneath the rafters, or weeping with joy over the shimmering web of a spider in morning dew. She had seen beauty in everything, but not any more now. Her eyes darted to every shadow. She no longer wandered the woods, no longer sang the lullabies of their ancestors. Roman soldiers had not touched her, but they had entered her into her breath, her dreams, her silence at night. She curled near the fire as if trying to disappear into the ash. He had once sworn to protect her, but what use is a brother's vow against the march of empire? The clang of hammers grew louder, a heartbeat not his own. Not the heartbeat of deer or wolf or wind, but of stone being laid over bone. He rose. The wooden horse was still in his palm. He stared at it, as if it might answer the question forming in his chest. To stay? To kneel? To live? Or to rise? He could not see the faces of the men beyond the hill, but he saw the line of trees that had been cut to make way for their walls. He saw the cart tracks scarring the fields. He saw the posts driven into sacred ground, places where his ancestors had once buried their dead with herbs and feathers and songs. Now only the chant of drills, the rhythm of stone on stone, and still the river moved endlessly, without permission, without loyalty, carrying soil, bones, seeds, and ash alike. Perhaps that was the answer. He took one step toward the water, the toy still in his hand. The sun, pale and unsure, blinked through the haze above him. Its light, diffused and bloodless, spilled over the river in ribbons of smoke-stained gold. The wind shifted, and with it came a scent, not of pine or earth, but of leather, oiled and tanned. Roman, they were closer now. The edge of the forest no longer rustled with birds, only boots, brands. Grip tightened around the toy. He did not feel the cold anymore, not in his fingers, not in his chest. He looked once more at the river, and then at the hill behind him, where the stones of their ancestors stood half buried in lichen and moss, watching, waiting. A choice had been made, not just by him, but by the land, by the river, by the silence that had endured for centuries. He placed the horse inside his cloak, a talisman, a memory, a vow. The hammering continued beyond the ridge, Rome building its certainty. But beneath it all, beneath the earth, beneath the names carved in new stone, a murmur stirred. Not yet a roar, but it was coming, and when it came, would not speak Latin. It would speak in thunder, in roots, in blood. The wind wept through the forest like an old widow mourning names the world no longer remembered. It dragged its sorrow through bare limbs and hollow trunks, carrying the scent of iron and wet leaves, and something older still, something that once knew the shape of prayers. Morwen sat beside the fire. Her fingertips dyed blue and red, wove in matter, staining her skin like memory etched in blood and sky. Her loom groaned gently beneath her hands, the wool beneath. Her touch was rough, tangled, warm, like the breath of the sheep who had given it. She wove not just thread, but protection, fertility, remembrance, patterns so old they were passed not by voice, but by hand, curve by curve, loop by loop. The secret language spun into cloth but today the symbols felt brittle, as if they could snap under the weight of the sky. The storm had not yet arrived, but the forest knew it. The trees leaned inward, holding their breath. Even the birds, those that hadn't fled, had fallen silent. Morwen looked up. Over the tree line, smoke rose, thick, gray, foreign, and beneath it, the distant rhythm of metal striking wood. Not the song of village hands gathering fuel. No, these were not the axes of survival. These were the axes of erasure. The Romans had come, not in war columns this time, but in maps and ropes and sharpened stakes. They spoke of progress, of roads and reason, but the forest heard only the splitting of its ribs. She turned toward the children, their laughter floating like dandelion seed in the dusk. A girl plucked a doll from the earth, its straw limbs muddy, but its face still smiling. A boy held it out, pretending to heal it with a fern. But even play could not quiet the tremor beneath their feet. This forest had cradled generations, kept their secrets in roots and bark, guarded their gods in glades thick with mist and moss. Her village had never known walls. Its only defense was silence, seclusion, an unspoken pact with the woods. You protect us. We protect you. But now the pact was breaking. The Roman surveyors moved like spiders across the land, measuring, calculating, piercing the earth with stakes of certainty. They walked with chalk and rule, carving straight lines across curved lives. They did not ask where the spirits dwelled. They did not kneel at the sacred springs. They simply marked and moved forward. More wind. Felt it in her chest, an ache not of body, but of memory, as if something ancient within her was being plucked loose. Like a thread unraveling from the weave, she turned to the loom dot. There, beside the wool, lay a bone comb, yellowed with time, soft from use, a gift from her mother, and from her mother. Before her, it had passed through hands that had braided hair for weddings, for births, for burials. It was not beautiful, but it knew things. Its teeth had whispered through generations of hair, catching stories in their gaps. She ran her thumb over it and felt warmth, a warmth that did not belong to the fire. Outside, the shaman stood at the cave's mouth. His robes were tattered, his body bent, but his presence still rooted deep. His face was a forest in itself, lined with paths of time, shadowed by hollows of grief. In his hand, a pouch of dried herbs, mugwort, rowan, fennel. Their scent drifted like ghosts around him. He swayed slowly, side to side, listening, not with ears, but with something older. Morwen knew what he heard, not sound, but silence. The silence of the old gods, the ones buried beneath Roman pillars, the ones who no longer received offerings, only footsteps. Still, the shaman swayed. Still, he listened, and in that listening, something stirred. The rain came at last. First, a whisper, then a song, a soft patter across the leaves, painting the earth with silver sorrow. The drops struck her skin like tears that had traveled far to find her. She looked again to the trees. They did not resist the rain. They welcomed it, let it run down their trunks, like absolution, let it soak the wounds where axes had bit. A branch cracked in the distance, not from the wind. Morwen stiffened. Then a trumpet, sharp, alien, a Roman call, not of war, but of arrival. It pierced the harmony of the forest like a nail through bark. The children fell still. Even the fire dimmed in the hush that followed. Morwen closed her fingers around the cone. It pulsed faintly, like a second heartbeat, a message in bone. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, whether they would be moved or burned, or absorbed into roads and taxes and gods of marble and law. But she knew this. Something would remain, a song, perhaps, or a carving in hidden bark, or the whisper of a loom pattern that no Roman hand could read, and someone would carry the comb. Someone would remember. The rain deepened. The sky bled blue, and through the hush, the forest listened, still, waiting, watching, not yet broken, not yet silent. The sea did not sleep. It howled, and struck, and swallowed. It sang no lullabies, only the songs of shipwrecks and long-forgotten names. Beneath its surface lay the bones of sailors and kings alike, stripped of their crowns and prayers, equal in salt and silence. And on the cliff's edge, where land dared to meet this unruly god, she stood, motionless, breath shallow, heart echoing the distant drums. Aela. Her hair wild with wind and spray, tangled like the brambles of the headland. Her eyes, the color of a winter tide, stared out across the steel horizon. She held no weapon, wore no armor, only the pendant, a small flame of amber that pulsed against her chest with a stubborn, ancestral heat. Below her, the sea tore itself against the cliffs, 1,000 years of fury in each crash. Yet the land still stood, scarred, crumbling, but standing like her dut. The wind tasted of brine and sorrow, of weed and kelp and distant ash, and beneath it, faint but undeniable, the scent of something wrong, frankincense, imported holiness. The Romans had built a camp nearby, their fires unnatural. The drums often pull with the old rhythms of this place. This land was dumb known land, not carved by Senate decree or measured in denarii. It was shaped by goals and stormlight, by blood, feuds and salt harvests. Its stories weren't etched in stone, but sung in mead. Halls and screamed from ship decks. She remembered those songs, feasts that shook the great hall with laughter. Her father's voice, loudest of all, booming over the clash of cups and the thrum of drums carved from seal hide. The bards would chant the names of ancestors who rode the foam like spirits, longboats slicing through waves like sharpened blades. They were not conquerors, they were of the sea, children of storm. Now the songs were fading, swallowed by whispers of treaties, of roads and tides, of strange laws wrapped in gold and cruelty. Allah's fingers closed tighter around the pendant. It had belonged to her mother, a woman as fierce as any chieftain. They said the amber held the last tears of the sun, solidified in time. Her mother wore it to birth, to war, to mourning. It had never cracked, even when the Roman blades came through their village, quiet and efficient. Even when the hall burned, even when they were told, politely, that they would be moved inland for their own safety. She had not cried, not then, not even when they buried the bards, but the sea. The sea wept for her. Every morning it came back, bringing wreckage, driftwood, shells, nets, bones, a memory at her feet, tangled and damp like the fishing net now coiled beside her boots. Old, frayed, carried in on the tide, forgotten by its owner, or perhaps left behind in haste. A ghost of a life that once was daily, sacred, unremarkable. She bent, lifting it slowly. The rough twine bit into her palm, cold, real, a fisherman's tool turned relic, a symbol of entrapment, of endings. She looked toward the camp. Its fires burned pale in the distance. Smoke rose straight into the sky, unswayed by wind, as if the land itself could not touch them. Even their tents seemed unnatural, stiff, foreign, smelling of oil in order, and through the wind came the rhythm again. Drums, not the pulsing, heart-like beat of her people. No, this was something colder, measured, inevitable. The sound of empire, each thud, a footstep forward. One more name erased, one more ritual forbidden, one more child taught to speak in Latin rather than song. Allah's thoughts turned to Finn, her brother, just 12, but already stronger than most men. He had learned to cast nets before he could count. He could name every bird by its cry, current by its chill. The sea spoke to him as it had spoken to their ancestors. But now, even he had begun to ask strange questions. What is a praetor? Why must we pay to fish in our own waters? Do gods wear metal masks? The pendant grew warmer. She closed her hand around it. Hunger. The world was shifting, not by choice, but by force. And yet, she did not move. The Romans could burn their fires, raise their gods, draw their lines in the soil, that they could not silence the tide. They could not chain the gulls, and they could not erase the memory of salt that lived in her blood. somewhere inland. Voices were already forgetting, but here on the edge of the world, the wind still remembered every name shouted to the sea. She looked to the waves, to the horizon, where the dark shapes of ships still loomed. Not sails now, but wings, vultures, waiting. The storm would come, it always did, and whether she drowned in it or rose with it, she would not go quietly. The fishing net slipped from her hand, claimed again by the sea. But the amber, she kept a sunstone, held against the night. She stepped back from the edge. The cliffs would hold. For now, and the sea would speak forever. The chamber breathed, not with lungs, but with silence, heavy, slow, alive. The earth here did not forget. It held memory in stone and shadow, pressed deep beneath the skin of the mountain, where men spoke in whispers and walked with reverence. Torvin stood with one hand against the wall, a stone course beneath his calloused fingers, slick with old damp and older grief. His breath fogged in a chill, swallowed by the dark before it could return to him. Around him, the mine yawned, wide and watching, not a prison, but a sanctum, a cathedral, carved not by chisel, but by time and toil. He had known these tunnels since boyhood, their turns, their tremors, their secrets, but tonight it felt different. The copper veins that once shimmered with promise now gleamed like scars, torn open, exposed. Wounds in the body of the mountain bled dry, not by the hands of kin, but by strangers above. The Romans spoke, their voices sharp, clipped, fell like stones down the shafts. Commands barked without understanding, orders given with no respect for rhythm, for silence, for spirit. They spoke in tongues that bent the world into straight lines and schedules. But here, the world curved, folded, hummed. Torvin's people, the Ordovises, had sung in these mines. They sang not just to keep time, to call the gods, to praise the stone, to honor the copper that fed their hearts and their altars. Each strike of hammer against or was a prayer. Each song, a bond between flesh and earth. But now, only echoes remained. He moved slowly through the corridor, his tallow lamp swinging low. The flame danced across ancient carvings, rough figures etched into rock. Their hands raised, their eyes hollow. Ancestors, witnesses, their mouths opened wide. Forever, mid-chant, mid-warning, mid-remembrance, he paused at the sacred alcove. There, in the shallow niche, rested a bowl of still water, cold, possibly clear, fed by a spring that had run for centuries, untouched by surface light. The water glimmered faintly, catching the glow of the flame like a hidden eye. Watching, the old shaman stood near, cloaked in layered skins, in silence. His face was a history of creases and coal dust, his eyes closed but not asleep, listening, not to the Romans, not to Torvin, but to something deeper. He swayed, back and forth, to a rhythm only the mountain remembered. In his gnarled hand, a pouch, fennel, sage, dried heather herbs once used to bless new tunnels, to protect the living from what slept too deep. Their scent still lingered, faint but defiant. Torvin did not interrupt. He knew better. Instead, he reached into his tunic and drew out the amulet copper, pure, cold, the size of a thumbprint, but older than any coin Rome could mint. It had passed from father to son, mother to daughter, from the first miner who struck the earth and gave thanks, to Torvin, now standing on the edge of surrender. Its surface bore symbols, spirals, knots, the curves of rivers and ridgelines, shapes of winds, not written words, lived ones. He closed his fist around it. The weight was slight, but it pulled on something inside him, like gravity rediscovered. He thought of Reese, his son, barely old enough to hold a pick, but already eager, curious, innocent, wide-eyed, as He followed his father into shallow tunnels, asking questions of rock and root, dreaming of the day he would earn his own amulet. But what dreams would remain if the songs were forgotten? The chants were replaced by quotas. If copper became currency, not communion, the Romans would say they brought order. Oh, that they civilized the wild. But here, in the hush of the earth, Torvin saw the lie. They paved the land, but they did not listen to it. They taxed the harvest, but did not bless it. They mined the copper, but cursed the spirit that gave it. The distant sound of pickaxes rang down from above, metallic, methodical, hollow. Not the strong, sure clang of belief, but the frantic tapping of exploitation. And beneath it, the faint rumble of carts, creaking under weight, stolen from the belly of the mountain, as if the land itself wept with each wheel turn. Torvin looked to the shaman once more, still swaying, still silent. But in that stillness, the truth louder than war drums. This was not a fight of weapons. Not yet, not always. This was a fight of memory, of will. He stepped forward and placed the amulet into the spring, not as an offering, as a vow. The copper glowed faintly beneath the water, as if answering, not with fire, but with patience, because mountains do not rise quickly, but neither do they fall. He turned, gripping his lamp once more. The tunnels stretched behind him, dark, uncertain. Ahead, the sounds of Rome, but somewhere between. Resolve, as he walked, the amulet, wet, warm, pulsed gently in his palm, and, above, the pickaxes faltered for just a breath, as if the mountain had inhaled and was ready to speak. The earth did not speak in words, but it listened, and in the sacred grove of the Brigantes, every stone, every tree, quay, every breeze that danced through the ferns, remembered. Lyra knelt beneath the oldest oak, where the roots bulged like twisted limbs, ancient and unyielding. Her fingers traced the carved spirals in the bark, each line worn by centuries of prayer, of blood, of hope. The woad on her hands, a deep blue that shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight, marked her as keeper, as witness, as daughter of a fading world. She had come before dawn, for the light could shatter the illusions of safety. In the grove, shadow was sanctuary, silence, a song. Around her, the forest pulsed, not with sound, but with presence. A breath here, a rustle there. The stream, unseen, murmured its soft hymns in the underbrush. Somewhere nearby, an owl called once, then fell quiet. But beyond the trees, another rhythm, the bark of Roman orders, clipped and metallic, clang of metal on stone, the dull, foreign beat of boots against the earth, marching to the drum of conquest. They were drawing closer. Every day, Lyra had seen them from the ridge, rows of ironclad men, their faces hard and unyielding, their tools dissecting the land with cold precision. Roads that cut through the sacred hills, fences where once the wild ran free, forts that rose like tumors in the belly of the land. Their gods demanded obedience. Their coins bore the faces of emperors. Their laws had no space for groves, or songs, or spirits that whispered in leaves. But here, the hush beneath the oak, Lyra still heard them. The old ways, faint, fragile, but not yet gone. She reached for the small basket at her side, a humble weave of reed and grass. Inside, berries, still damp from the morning dew. Her offering, not for sustenance, but for remembrance, a gift for the ancestors who once danced in this grove. Its ash now fed the roots, whose songs still lingered in the moss. She held one berry between her fingers, smooth, round, full of life, its skin cold, but pulsing, still beating. In its way, she thought of Bronwyn, her younger sister, barely 10 summers old, curious, gentle, bright. But now, quiet, pale, afraid. She'd heard the stories of what happened in the lowland villages, of altars burned, of druids hanged in the square, of mothers taken and sons pressed into foreign ranks. Bronwyn had asked once, "Will they take our trees?" Lyra hadn't answered, because she didn't know, and that silence was its own kind of wound. From across the clearing, the old druidess swayed beside the spring. She wore no crown, no pendant, no proof of power, only time etched in her skin and stillness in her breath. Her hands cupped a sprig of mistletoe, its berries pale as ghostlight, trembling in the moon breeze. That plant had once crowned kings, had healed wounds, had marked the turning of seasons. Now it marked resistance. The grove was no longer only sacred, it was defiant, and Lyra, so small against the vastness of tree and night, felt the embers stir inside her chest. This land had fed her people, had buried their dead, had kissed their feet and broken their bones and wrapped them in moss when the world grew too cold. It was more than territory. It was soul, and that soul was being paved, carved, commanded. She pressed her palm against the soil, not to pray to, swear. No Roman map could chart these woods. No census could name their gods. No army could salt every grove. There would be places still where the old spirits breathed, where a girl with blue-painted hands could kneel in silence and feel home. But the peace was brittle. It cracked as the wind shifted, and with it came the scent of tanned Roman leather, sharp and oily, an insult to the purity of bark and blossom. And then a horn, far off, but close enough. Its shrill cry broke the hush like a blade. The forest did not respond, but Lyra did. She rose, slow, steady, the amulet at her neck, carved from antler, etched with the shape of an oak leaf, caught the moonlight and flickered like a tiny star. Her gaze found the druidess. No words passed. None were needed. They knew the war was not of swords and spears alone. It was of memory, of belief, of presence. As the horn's echo faded, the grove held its breath again, and the woad on Lyra's hands seemed to glow, not with light, but with refusal. She turned toward the trees, toward the path that would lead her home, but not before kneeling. Once more to the oldest oak, she placed the berry basket at its roots, pressed her brow to the moss, and whispered, "Remember us?" The tree, silent as ever, did not answer. But somewhere in the wind, soft like a mother's hush, something answered back, and in the east, the first pale threads of dawn bled into the leaves like prophecy. The great hall, once alive with fire and fury, had fallen to silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of surrender. Cale sat unmoving on the carved oak throne, his chieftain's torque cold against the skin of his neck. It had once been a crown of honor, forged in loyalty, bestowed in firelight, kissed by the blood of ancestors. Now it felt like a chain, its golden weight around a heart that no longer beat freely. The air was thick with stillness, stale mead, cold ash, memory. Here, in this chamber of ghosts, laughter once rang against timbered beams. Cups had clashed, feet had stamped. The bards had sung of wolf-blooded warriors and thunder-born kings. Their voices, proud and loud, had woven themselves into the very grain of the hall. But now only echoes, and beyond these walls, a new rhythm, metal on stone, Latin orders barked into wind. The rising heartbeat of empire, carving its laws into the soil. Cale's hands gripped the armrests, calloused fingers brushing against the smooth bone of a small flute, a gift from his father, once a boy's plaything, now a relic. Its carved runes still sharp symbols of gods that no longer walked the land, gods forgotten by Rome. He traced them slowly, as if by touch alone he could wake them. His people, the Catavellini, had ruled with fire in their blood and storms in their eyes. Their warriors had run like wild stags through oak and thorn, answering to no king but their own. Their alliances had been sworn with blade and blood, not with scrolls sealed by wax dot. And now there were scrolls, parchments that smelled of foreign ink and conquest, treaties wrapped in silk, but binding like shackles. The Roman envoys had come with smiles stretched thin, words oiled with civility. Behind them, soldiers, roads, temples, taxes, demands. Cale had not spoken during their visit. He had watched, listened, measured the cold beneath their warmth, and when they left, something in the hall had died. He looked toward the high rafters, where once Maeve's laughter had echoed like birdsong. His daughter, fierce, untamed, born beneath the Beltane fire. She had danced with blades in her hands and wildflowers in her hair. He remembered her chasing the hounds through the heather, her feet bare, her spirit brighter than any flame. But lately, as she walked slower, her eyes watched the tree line too often. And in her silence, Cale heard what she dared not speak. Would she be married for alliance, offered for peace, named not for love, but for survival? He felt the twist in his chest. This land had given them everything. Its rivers had sung to their dead. Its stones had kept their secrets, and now was being measured, divided, claimed. A breeze drifted through the cracked slats of the wall, and with it, the scent of parchment, leather, and Roman oil. Cale's jaw clenched. That smell did not belong here. Near the entrance, the old seer stood motionless, his face a canvas of time and prophecy. Eyes clouded, but gaze unwavering. In his hand, a pouch of dried herbs, mugwort, heather, boneset, the kindling of old magic. Faint and fading, he swayed gently, as if to a rhythm only the ancestors could hear. The flames from the torch quivered, not from wind, but from knowing. This was not defeat. Not yet. Not while Cale still wore the torque. Not while the flutes still sang, even if only in dreams. Not while Maeve's fire had not yet gone out. The hall would hold, even as the Roman's trumpet pierced the silence. Distant, shrill, and unyielding, the great hall breathed once more. Not in joy, not in triumph, but in defiance. Cale rose slowly. The stone beneath his feet groaned. His shadow stretched long, distorted, but not broken. The flute he held, ancient, worn, silent, felt warm in his hand. He would not kneel, not yet. Let them build their roads. Let them press their coins. Let them carve their gods into marble and steal names from the wind. But in these halls, in this land, beneath the skin of every tree and stone in silence, the old blood stirred, and, when the time came, the halls would ring again, not with feasting, but with the song of reckoning.